Hello everyone, I am Mr. Night Truth. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and let's go down into the story.
Story number 1. The road to the lake was long, winding, and almost too quiet. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction, tall pines looming like watchmen, their shadows cutting across the dirt path. Daniel gripped the steering wheel of their rented truck, eyes fixed ahead, while Claire leaned against the window, her reflection pale in the glass. For most couples, a weekend fishing trip in the Canadian wilderness might have felt romantic. For them, it was a test, a desperate attempt to repair something already cracked. Claire finally broke the silence. "You don't even like fishing," she said softly, not looking at him. Daniel smirked. "And you don't even like camping, so I guess we're even." The words hung heavier than he intended, and Claire shifted uncomfortably. Their marriage, once full of small jokes and easy laughter, now carried an edge that cut at unexpected moments. By the time they reached the lake, evening light had settled low across the sky. The surface of the water gleamed like black glass, still and perfect, almost too perfect. No other boats dotted the shoreline. No voices echoed, just the ripple of wind through trees and the soft hum of insects. "This is isolated," Claire whispered, stepping out of the truck. "That's the point," Daniel replied, stretching. "No phones, no work, just us." But as he unloaded their gear, he couldn't help scanning the horizon. Something about the silence pressed against him, demanding acknowledgement. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. They set up camp close to the water's edge. Claire knelt by the shoreline, running her fingers through the sand. It was damp, gritty, and colder than expected. She frowned, brushing away a dark lump buried beneath the surface. Pulling it free, she realized it was a wallet, swollen from years of soaking. The leather was cracked, slimy with moss, but the clasp still opened. Inside, water-stained bills clung together, useless. But wedged behind them was a photograph, a man smiling stiffly, beside a small child with a fishing pole. Both faces were blurred with water damage, their features almost erased. "Daniel!" Her voice trembled. She held out the wallet. He took it, flipping through quickly before shutting it with a snap. "Someone probably dropped it," he said flatly, tossing it onto a rock. "Happens all the time." Claire frowned. "Out here? In the middle of nowhere?" "Claire," he sighed, "don't start. Let's just enjoy the weekend, okay?" But her eyes lingered on the photograph, blurred yet haunting, like faces, reaching out through time. As dusk settled, they pushed their boat into the water. Daniel rowed while Claire sat stiffly, arms crossed against the chill. The lake reflected the darkening sky, unbroken except for their ripples. Daniel cast his line and leaned back, forcing himself to relax. For a while there was nothing, no tug, no splash, just the endless quiet. Then, suddenly, the line twitched. He sat up, reeling sharply. Something pulled against him, not the usual quick dart of a fish. This was heavier, slower, dragging the line downward with steady force. Daniel braced his feet against the boat. "Feels big," he muttered, pulling harder. The line went slack all at once. Daniel nearly fell backward. He reeled quickly, but the hook came back empty. The lure bent at an odd angle, as if it had been crushed. Claire's face had gone pale. That wasn't normal. "It was probably just snagged on something," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "On what?" she pressed. "It's a lake, Daniel, not the ocean." He didn't answer. Instead, he cast the line again, pretending confidence, but his heart thumped. The water below seemed deeper than before, darker. By the time they returned to shore, Night had fully descended. A thin crescent moon glowed faintly above the treetops, but the woods themselves were swallowed in shadow. Claire couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, though the silence remained complete. She sat by the fire, clutching her jacket around her, while Daniel fiddled with the fishing gear, avoiding her gaze. "You know this isn't just about us, right?" Claire finally said. Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "You think this trip is about fixing things between us, but something feels wrong here. Like we're not supposed to be here." He wanted to laugh it off, but the image of the warped photograph lingered in his mind, refusing to fade. He said nothing, tossing another log onto the fire. The flames crackled, sparks shooting into the night air. Beyond the reach of the light, the lake remained motionless, its surface so smooth it seemed unnatural. Claire turned her gaze to it, her pulse quickening. For just a second, she thought she saw ripples spreading across the center, as if something large had shifted beneath. But when she blinked, the water was flat again, mirroring the stars above. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself. "Something's out there." Daniel didn't reply. He just stared into the fire, jaw clenched, pretending not to hear. And behind them, at the shoreline, the forgotten wallet had shifted slightly in the sand, as though nudged by an unseen hand. The storm arrived faster than either of them expected. By dawn, the sky was already bruised with thick rolling clouds, swallowing the early light. The lake, once eerily still, now churned with restless waves. Claire stood at the edge of the water, rain dripping from her hair, watching how the ripples spread outward like veins across glass. Daniel came up behind her, zipping his jacket. "We'll wait it out. It won't last long." But his voice lacked certainty, and Claire noticed. The fire from last night was gone, drowned under the rain. Their small camp looked pitiful now. 2 soaked chairs, a half-collapsed tent, gear scattered across the mud. Claire hugged her arms tightly, her gaze drifting toward the shoreline where she had found the wallet. It was gone. The place where she left it was just sand, smooth, as though it had never been there at all. Her breath quickened. She hadn't touched it. Daniel hadn't touched it. And yet, she forced herself to turn away, digging through a bag for dry socks. That was when her fingers brushed something hard at the bottom. She pulled it out. Keys, rusted, fused together at the ring, caked in silt. They smelled faintly of the lake. "Daniel," her voice broke. She held them up. "These were in our bag." He frowned. "What? No, that's not possible. They weren't..." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "You probably just grabbed them without noticing." "Daniel, they weren't there. I checked this bag 3 times yesterday." Her voice rose, but the thunder drowned it, rolling across the lake like a warning. By mid-morning, the storm had softened into a drizzle. Mist curled over the water's surface, shrouding it in pale grey. Daniel insisted on taking the boat out anyway, claiming fishing would keep them distracted. Reluctantly, Claire climbed in. The air was colder on the lake, heavy with moisture. Every sound felt amplified. The dip of oars, the drip of water down the hull, Claire's uneven breaths. Daniel cast his line, staring into the shifting fog. Claire couldn't take her eyes off the surface. It seemed alive, as if something just beneath was pushing upward, waiting. Halfway across, she saw it, a figure, human-shaped, standing knee-deep near the far shore, perfectly still. Her hand shot out, grabbing Daniel's arm. "There, do you see him?" Daniel squinted into the mist. "There's nothing there." "I swear to God, Daniel, he was watching us." Her panic trembled through her voice, but when she looked again, the shape was gone, melted into the fog. Back at camp, the silence between them turned sharp. Claire's eyes burned, but it wasn't just fear. It was betrayal. Old wounds surfacing, she finally snapped. "I know why you wanted this trip, Daniel, but you don't know why I agreed." He turned, stiff. What's that supposed to mean? This lake, she whispered. I heard about it on a podcast. They called it the Lake of the Missing. Families who came here never came back. Fishermen, campers, all gone. No answers, no bodies, just disappeared. Daniel stared at her, stunned. You brought me here on purpose. I had to know if it was true. Tears cut down her face, mixing with rain. You think our marriage is the only thing broken here? People died, Daniel. And now, she held up the rusted keys, her hand shaking. Now this is happening to us. He took a step back, jaw clenched. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, so what, Claire? You want this to be real? You want ghosts in the water? Or maybe you just wanted an excuse to drag us out here to punish me? Her voice cracked. Punish you for what? The question silenced him. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. His eyes darted toward the lake instead, where the mist was thickening again. He cast his line sharply, like anger could mask fear. That night, the voices began. At first, Claire thought it was the wind carrying strange echoes across the water, but the longer she listened, the clearer they became. Low, distorted murmurs, like whispers bubbling up from beneath the surface. Daniel sat rigid by the fire, pretending not to hear, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Then came the splash. Not the quick dart of a fish, but something heavier, deliberate, breaking. The water close to shore. Claire's head snapped up. In the glow of the firelight, ripples spread outward, dark and wide, as though something massive had surfaced just long enough to disturb the lake. She clutched Daniel's arm. Tell me you heard that. He shook her off. It's nothing. But he stopped, his gaze fixed on the shoreline. In the sand, near where the wallet had been, lay a scrap of fabric, torn, stained dark, its edges frayed as though ripped free by force. Claire picked it up with trembling hands. It was a piece of a flannel shirt, soaked in something darker than water. Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel, people didn't just disappear here. They were taken. The rain started again, harder this time, hammering the fire into smoke. The darkness pressed in from every side, swallowing the camp, the lake, and the woods into one shapeless mass. And through it, somewhere across the water, came the faint sound of a child laughing. The child's laughter echoed long after the storm had faded. Claire sat frozen in the tent, every muscle rigid, waiting for it to stop. But silence was worse. Silence meant the lake was listening again. Daniel lay beside her, restless, pretending to sleep. His hand twitched each time the wind stirred, as if he expected the tent flap to be pulled open by something neither of them wanted to see. By morning, the fog was thick as wool, rolling low over the water and seeping into the trees. Their gear was soaked, their food ruined. Daniel shoved what he could into the boat. His jaw was set, his movements mechanical. We're leaving, he said flatly. Claire's voice cracked. Finally. But as they pushed away from shore, she couldn't shake the thought that leaving wasn't an option. Not here, not for them. The boat creaked as it drifted into the center of the lake. Every direction looked the same. Pale mist, water stretching endlessly, horizon swallowed. Daniel rowed hard, but the world seemed to fold around them, keeping them circling the same invisible point. Claire clutched the sides of the boat, knuckles white. Something brushed the hull. A dull thud. Then another, harder. The boat rocked, violently. Daniel cursed, gripping the oars tighter. Something's underneath us, Claire whispered. The words barely left her lips before the water erupted. A shadow surged beneath the boat, huge, indistinct, but human shapes seemed to pulse within it. Arms, faces, fleeting and distorted. Claire screamed as the boat tipped dangerously to one side. Daniel swung the oar into the water with desperate force, striking at nothing. "Row!" he shouted. "I am!" Her hands trembled on the edge, but she wasn't rowing. She was staring, because she had seen it. Pale hands, dozens of them, reaching up from the black below, fingers grazing. The wood! The boat lurched again. This time Daniel lost his balance. His body slammed against the side, and with a sickening splash, he was gone. "Daniel!" Claire's scream tore through the fog. She dropped to her knees, leaning over, searching the dark water. For one split second, she saw his face, eyes wide, mouth open, before he was dragged down, bubbles rising like a trail of vanishing breath. Without thinking, she dove after him. The lake swallowed her whole. Icy water crushed her chest, the cold so sharp it felt like knives. She opened her eyes into the black, searching desperately. Her hands brushed something. Rope, lines, old nets tangled together like a spider's web. She pulled, fought, twisted. That's when she saw them. Bodies. Not fresh, not whole. Skeletal remains wrapped in shredded clothes, their bones locked in knots of fishing line. Hollow eyes stared up at her through the murk, jaws frozen open as though still gasping for air. And among them, Daniel, thrashing wildly, his ankle caught in the mess, being dragged down by the dead. Claire clawed at him, pulling with everything she had, but the lines only tightened, cutting into her skin. More hands rose from the dark, pale, silent, grasping. She could feel them tugging at her clothes, her hair, her arms. Her lungs screamed for air. For a heartbeat, Daniel's eyes met hers. Pure terror. And then, resignation. He shook his head, bubbles spilling from his mouth as he mouthed words she couldn't hear. A plea, or maybe goodbye. The water swallowed him whole. Claire screamed, but the sound was lost in the flood of silence. She kicked upward, breaking free of the lines at the last second, her body bursting through the surface in a violent gasp. She clung to the edge of the boat, dragging herself over with shaking limbs, her body convulsed with sobs. But the lake gave nothing back. No ripple, no splash, no sign Daniel had ever been there. Hours later, when the fog began to thin, she stumbled back onto shore, barefoot, shivering, her eyes hollow. The campsite looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. The fire pit lay cold. Their chairs still sat neatly in the mud. Only the wallet remained, lying just where she had first found it. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The photo inside had changed. The man was still there, smiling stiffly, but the child's face was blurred beyond recognition, almost erased by water damage. Almost. She squinted through tears and realized the blurred outline wasn't a child anymore. It was a woman with long dark hair clutching a fishing pole. Her own reflection stared back at her. Claire dropped the wallet, heart pounding. She ran for the tree line, tripping, stumbling, pushing through branches until she collapsed on the dirt road that led back to civilization. 2 days later, authorities found her wandering along the highway, barefoot, dehydrated, incoherent. When they questioned her, she spoke only of the lake, of voices calling her name from the water. No body was ever recovered. No proof of Daniel's existence remained, not even his ID. But locals still whisper about the lake, about the woman they found who came back alone, about how she never really left it behind, because even now, in her dreams, she still hears the sound of laughter echoing across the water, and every morning she wakes to find her sheets damp with lake water. Story number 2. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly, a barren sea of stone and heat shimmering off rust-colored sand. The air itself felt heavy, like an oven door left open. Our rental van coughed to a stop beside the remains of a ghost town. Half-collapsed shacks, a rusting water tower, and a weather-beaten sign with letters so faded they looked like scars. "This is it?" Jenna asked, her voice flat. She stepped out slowly, shielding her eyes against the sun. Sweat clung to her neck, darkening the collar of her shirt. Marcus, on the other hand, grinned. He swung the camera strap over his shoulder and gave a sweeping gesture to the ruins. Perfect shot. Abandoned, eerie, forgotten. Exactly what people want to see. I forced a nod, though unease pressed against me. This was supposed to be a documentary about forgotten America, about the places history buried. But the way Marcus's eyes lingered on the mine entrance in the distance, I wondered if this was really about something else. The mine loomed across the dry earth, a gaping black scar carved into the hillside. Even from here, it looked unnatural, too dark, too wide, as though the land itself had been gutted and never healed. "Alex," Jenna said, pulling me from my thoughts. Her voice was low, a warning. "I don't like this." "You said that about the motel last night too," I tried, forcing a smile. "And you survived." She didn't smile back. She just crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. The air between us felt brittle, ready to crack at the slightest pressure. Marcus clapped his hands. "Come on, let's get closer before the light changes." He strode ahead, boots crunching on gravel, camera already recording. We followed, though each step dragged. By the time we reached the mine entrance, the air had shifted. The desert heat thinned, replaced with a chill that seeped from the cavern's mouth. The silence was overwhelming, as though sound itself refused to enter. The wooden beams holding the entrance sagged, scarred with time, carved with initials from long-gone trespassers. Broken helmets lay scattered in the dust, their straps frayed. A single rusted lunch pail rested against the wall, untouched for decades. Jenna crouched near it, running her hand over the dirt. "Why does it look like someone just left? Like they were planning to come back?" I swallowed hard. "Maybe they never could." Marcus turned the camera toward her. "Say that again, but slower. It's good." She shot him a glare. "This isn't a game, Marcus." For a moment, tension sparked, their eyes locked. I stepped in, my voice sharp. "Enough. Let's just get what we came for and go." Inside, the mine swallowed us whole. The tunnel sloped downward, narrow and uneven, dust swirling with each step. Our flashlights sliced through the dark, beams catching on jagged rock. Graffiti coated the walls, layers of names, crude drawings, dates decades old. But beneath them, faint and deeper, there were markings carved into the stone itself. Not art, not vandalism, something else. Jenna trailed her fingers across one line. Her light steadied on words etched deep, the letters uneven, frantic. She whispered them aloud. "Don't follow the voices." The words sank into me like cold water. My throat tightened, but before I could speak, Marcus laughed nervously. Probably some drunk kid with a pocket knife. "Those letters are old," Jenna snapped. "Older than any of this graffiti." I leaned closer. She was right. The grooves had worn soft with time, the way only decades could manage. Whoever wrote it hadn't been joking. A rock shifted behind us, rolling across the floor. We all froze. My flashlight swung back toward the tunnel mouth. Nothing moved. The silence pressed harder now, like the mine itself was waiting for us to take another step. Jenna's voice was a thin thread. "We shouldn't be here." I wanted to agree, but Marcus's face was alight with something else. Hunger, maybe obsession. He kept the camera rolling, pointing it deeper into the tunnel. "Look," he said quietly, almost reverently. "It's not just a mine. It's a story. Something happened here. We're the ones who get to tell it." The weight of his words settled over us. The desert was gone, the daylight gone. All that remained was the cold breath of the earth and a darkness that seemed to stretch forever. I glanced once more at the carved warning, the edges trembling under Jenna's beam. "Don't follow the voices." But Marcus was already walking deeper, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows. I reached for Jenna's hand, but she pulled it back, her expression tight. The crack between us widened in the silence, and suddenly, I wasn't sure whether the mine was our real danger or each other. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside, came the sound of water dripping, slow, echoing, too rhythmic to be natural. We looked at each other, and without a word, followed Marcus into the dark. The air inside the mine grew colder as we pressed forward, our footsteps echoing in uneven rhythm. Each crunch of gravel underfoot seemed louder than it should have been, bouncing back from the walls as though the tunnels had mouths of their own. My flashlight beam trembled across rusted rails half buried in dirt, the remains of tracks that once carried ore carts. Now, they led only deeper into silence. Behind me, Jenna's breathing quickened. "Alex, this is too far." Marcus turned, his camera toward her, his grin sharp under the artificial glow. "We haven't even scratched the surface. People left this mine decades ago. Think about what's still down here. Artifacts, stories, maybe even bodies." "Don't say that," Jenna snapped. Her voice cracked at the last word. I felt the tension coil in the air, like a wire pulled too tight. Their bickering wasn't new, but here, in the darkness, it felt dangerous. The mine absorbed it, amplified it, made it something heavier. We reached a fork in the tunnel. One path sloped gently upward, littered with broken boards. The other spiraled downward, swallowed by black. Marcus didn't hesitate. He aimed his camera down the deeper shaft. "This way." Jenna caught my wrist. Her hand was trembling. "We should turn back." For a moment I almost agreed, but Marcus was already descending, his light bobbing, ahead. If we didn't follow, he'd go alone, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. The air thickened as we moved lower. Moisture slicked the walls, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust and something else, something sour, like rotting wood. Drips echoed from above, steady and slow, impossible to trace. That's when I heard it, a voice, soft, low, distant. "My name, Alex." I stopped dead, light jerking across the rock. My throat went dry. "Did you hear that?" Jenna froze beside me. "Hear what?" Marcus didn't stop. "It's the wind. Air currents in mines do that. Stop freaking out." But it hadn't sounded like wind. It had sounded like a whisper, almost pressed against my ear. We pressed on, deeper still. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness. Old support beams crisscrossed overhead, some cracked, others collapsed in heaps of splintered wood. A faint smell of smoke lingered, though there hadn't been fire here in decades. Our lights swept the floor, and Jenna gasped. There, in the dust, was a stake hammered into the ground. A faded strip of yellow tape clung weakly to it. Letters in black marker read, "Recovery Site, 1974. My stomach turned. This was a police marker. Marcus crouched low, camera zooming in. "Perfect. This is gold." "People died here," Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would you even—" "Because it's real," Marcus snapped. "This is what we came for. This is what people want to see. The truth. Or the spectacle," I cut in. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he'd lash out, but instead, he stood, brushing dust off his hands. "You don't get it, Alex. You never did." Jenna's hand found mine again, gripping tightly. Her fear had sharpened into anger. "He's using us. Don't you see it? He knew what this place was before we even came. He wanted us here. He wanted you here." I pulled my hand back, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed hard, eyes glistening in the glow of her flashlight. "Ask him." I turned, but Marcus was already walking deeper into the chamber, camera pointed ahead. His shoulders were rigid, his movements clipped. He didn't answer. That's when the lights flickered, and the lights flickered. First mine, then Jenna's. A sharp buzz, a sputter, and then black. Only Marcus's camera light remained, swinging wildly across the walls. The chamber swallowed us in shadows, the darkness thick enough to feel. "Marcus!" I shouted. His light jerked, briefly catching his face. His eyes were wide, not with excitement this time, but with fear. "Stay close!" The whispers rose again. Not one voice now, but many. Layered, overlapping, impossible to understand. The sound filled every crevice, weaving through the dark. Some were low and guttural, others high and brittle, like children playing in the distance. Jenna clutched my arm. "It's coming from everywhere." And then, above the whispers, a new sound. A scream. It came from deeper inside the mine, sharp and panicked, echoing through the chamber until it was impossible to tell where it had started. Marcus spun toward it, camera beam jerking wildly. "Someone's down here!" "No!" Jenna hissed, her nails dug into my skin. "That's not a person! That's not—" Her words cut off as rocks tumbled from above, striking the floor in sharp cracks. Dust rained down, stinging our eyes. The ceiling groaned like a living thing. "Go!" I yelled, shoving her toward the nearest tunnel. We stumbled blindly, half running, half crawling, while Marcus's camera light flailed behind us. The whispers chased us, rising to a fever pitch. My lungs burned, my vision blurred. But still we pressed forward, the tunnels twisting into a labyrinth. Finally, after what felt like hours, our lights sputtered back to life. Faint, weak, but enough. That's when we realized Marcus was gone. The chamber behind us lay empty. His light had vanished. Only his echoes remained, faint and distant, swallowed by the mine. "Marcus!" My shout tore my throat raw. No answer. Jenna's face was ghostly pale, streaked with dust and tears. She shook her head, trembling. "He's not lost. He went deeper. He wanted this." I stared at her, chest heaving. "You're saying he planned this?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He told me. Before the trip. He wanted to push you, to see what you'd do. He thought the mine would break you." Her confession hung in the air like poison. The betrayal, the manipulation, it all slotted into place. Marcus hadn't just brought us here for footage. He had brought us here to unravel. The whispers fell silent, abruptly, leaving only our ragged breaths. The mine waited, patient, suffocating. And somewhere far below, a single scream echoed again. Marcus, or whatever was left of him. Jenna gripped my hand. "If we go after him, we won't come back." Her words lingered in the suffocating dark, pulling us toward the inevitable collapse. The tunnels pressed in tighter the further we ran. Wooden beams sagged overhead, their splintered edges like teeth gnashing in the dim light. Dust swirled around us in choking clouds, stirred by every groan of the earth. My lungs burned, my throat raw from shouting Marcus's name. But the echoes had devoured him. Jenna's grip never left mine. She stumbled, nearly falling, but I hauled her upright. Her flashlight beam shook against the walls, slicing shadows into shapes that seemed alive. "We can't leave him," I gasped. Her reply was immediate, harsh. "He brought us here, Alex. He wanted this. You didn't hear the way he talked about it." Her words stung more than the dust scratching my throat. "That doesn't mean we abandon him." Before she could answer, a sharp crack split the air, the sound of wood snapping under unimaginable weight. A beam collapsed behind us, slamming into the ground with a deafening thud. Pebbles cascaded like rain. The mine was groaning, shifting, preparing to bury us alive. Jenna screamed. Her voice echoed against the stone and, almost instantly, another voice echoed back. Not hers, not mine, a man's voice, broken and ragged. "Help! Me!" It came from deeper in the tunnels. "Marcus!" My chest tightened. I turned toward the sound, but Jenna yanked my arm. "That's not him," she hissed. "It's them. Don't you get it? That's what the voices are. They want you to follow. The whispers rose again, layered and countless. This time I could almost pick out words. Come down. Come deeper. Don't leave. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices vibrated inside my skull. My name slithered through them, repeated over and over. Alex, Alex, Alex. Jenna shoved me, her face streaked with sweat and dust. We have to choose. Now. And then, a light. A faint, flickering glow deeper in the tunnel, moving as though carried by unsteady hands. Marcus! I shouted. The word ripped from my throat before I could stop it. The glow faltered, then steadied, as if answering me. Jenna's nails dug into my arm. No, please, it isn't him. But I was already moving. Something primal inside me demanded it. Not loyalty, not friendship, but something darker. A compulsion to follow what called to me. The tunnel sloped downward, the air heavier with every step. My flashlight flickered. The glow ahead brightened, pulling me like a lure. And then I saw him. Marcus stood in the center of a wide chamber, camera still slung around his neck. His face was pale, eyes wide, mouth working soundlessly. The glow wasn't from a flashlight. It came from the walls themselves, veins of phosphorescent mineral pulsing like veins under skin. Marcus! I stumbled forward, relief flooding. Me. He lifted his head slowly. His lips formed a word. Stay. The chamber shuddered, a deep vibration that rattled my bones. Behind me, Jenna screamed my name, but it sounded far away, muffled by the hum of the stone. Marcus's eyes rolled, upward, showing only whites. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch, and the ground split beneath him. A fissure tore open, glowing from within, and Marcus dropped without a sound. The light swallowed him whole. No! I lunged, but Jenna dragged me back just as the fissure snapped shut with a crack like thunder. The floor stilled, leaving only silence and dust. Marcus was gone, completely gone. My body shook, rage and grief and disbelief colliding. I turned on Jenna, my voice breaking. You knew he wasn't coming back. Her eyes were wild. I tried to warn you. You think I wanted this? Before I could respond, the mine answered for us. The ground trembled, beams splintered, and a roar like thunder filled the tunnels. The collapse had begun. Run! We sprinted, blinded by dust, chased by the sound of earth tearing itself apart. Rocks crashed around us, sparks flying as metal twisted and snapped. The mine was devouring itself, sealing every exit. Jenna fell, tripping over a half-buried rail. I turned, yanking her up with every ounce of strength left in me. Her face was grey with terror, eyes bloodshot, but she kept moving. We had no choice. The tunnel ahead narrowed, ceiling dropping lower and lower until we had to crouch. My back scraped rock, my knees bled, but still we clawed forward, coughing, choking, desperate, and then a faint draft, cool air brushing my face. Light! Jenna gasped, her voice breaking. I shoved forward, shoulders burning, and then burst into the open. The night sky stretched above us, stars scattered like broken glass. We collapsed onto the sand, coughing, gagging, half sobbing. Behind us, the mine groaned one last time, then collapsed inward with a thunderous roar. Dust billowed into the sky, blotting out the stars. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating silence. Jenna curled against me, shaking uncontrollably. Her whisper barely carried. It's over, but I couldn't answer, because it wasn't. The whispers hadn't stopped. Even as the mine lay sealed, buried under tons of rock, I heard them. In the spaces between breaths, in the rush of my blood, they lingered. Stay, stay, stay. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it made no difference. The voices weren't behind us anymore. They were inside me, and I knew, with a hollow certainty, that the mine hadn't let us go. It had only followed us out. Story number 3. The forest was never truly silent. Even in the dead of winter, Yellowstone breathed. The groan of frozen branches, the distant call of owls, the restless shuffle of unseen creatures pressing through snow. To most, it was a lullaby of wilderness. To Daniel Cross, it was both comfort and accusation. He tightened his coat and adjusted the beam of his flashlight. The night was heavy with a low mist, weaving through the trees like smoke from a fire no one had put out. The air bit at his skin, sharp with the metallic tang of cold. Daniel preferred these hours, when tourists were gone, when even the rangers kept to their cabins, because it allowed him to forget. Out here, under the endless black, no one asked him about the divorce papers waiting in a drawer back in Montana. No one questioned why he volunteered for months of remote night shifts. Elena walked beside him, her breath visible in the cold. She was new, barely a year into the job, still carrying that spark of curiosity that Daniel had long ago buried. Her voice was soft when she spoke, almost cautious. "You hear that?" Daniel paused, cocking his head. At first, it was only the sigh of wind dragging across the ridges. Then he noticed it, an irregular scrape, like claws dragging bark. Probably a bear, he muttered, or a wolf. "Wolves don't climb trees," Elena countered. They followed the sound until Daniel's flashlight found the tree. His breath caught. The trunk was shredded. Deep grooves raked across the bark nearly 8 feet high. No bear could reach that high without standing upright. And even then, the spacing was wrong. Elena ran her fingers lightly over the marks. "It's massive." Daniel's gut tightened. He knew better than to show fear, but something about those marks unsettled him. They were fresh, sap still wet at the edges. "Could be an old grizzly," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. "We'll note it in the log." But as they moved on, Daniel's thoughts drifted away from claw marks and into darker corners. He remembered the last fight with his wife, Sarah, the way her voice cracked when she said, "You're never here. You'd rather be lost in your woods than face me." She had been right. And when she found out about the affair, the colleague he swore meant nothing, everything fractured beyond repair. Now, when Daniel thought of home, it wasn't warmth or belonging. It was silence, the kind that pressed against his chest even, harder than the cold tonight. A sound tore him from his thoughts. It started low, a guttural moan carried by the wind. Then it climbed, splitting into something raw, something too jagged to be human, yet too anguished to be animal. It echoed between, the trees rising and falling like a wounded thing. Elena froze, eyes wide. That wasn't a wolf. Daniel's heart hammered. He wanted to say it was just the wind, a coyote, anything that explained away the dread crawling over his skin. But the truth was, he had heard screams in the forest before. Tourists lost, animals dying. This was different. This was layered, as if something tried to mimic a human cry but couldn't quite get it right. "We should head back," he said quickly. Elena hesitated. What if someone's hurt? The compassion in her voice stabbed at him. Once Sarah had sounded like that, worried, tender, before he drove it all into the ground. "Protocol," Daniel insisted, his voice harder than intended. "We radio. It in. Let the day team check." They turned back, their boots crunching against the frozen ground. But the forest seemed to follow. Each tree loomed closer, each shadow stretched longer. Daniel felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking their movement, a predator deciding whether to strike. At the ranger cabin, Daniel fumbled with the lock, his hands unsteady. Elena glanced at him, searching his face. "You've heard it before, haven't you?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed open the door, letting the dim lamplight spill across the room. His silence was an answer in itself. Inside, the radio crackled faintly with static, the usual lifeline to the rest of the park. Daniel sat heavily at the desk, staring at the logbook, pen unmoving in his hand. What was he supposed to write? unidentified scream, possible threat. He knew how quickly such notes vanished into bureaucracy, folded into explanations about weather or predators. Behind him, Elena paced. Something's out there. I can feel it. Daniel closed the logbook. Then we'll deal with it tomorrow. But even as he spoke, he knew the words were empty. The claw marks, the scream, the way the night itself seemed to lean closer. These weren't things that waited for daylight. Later, lying awake in his cot, Daniel stared at the wooden ceiling and listened. The forest pressed in, restless, whispering through the pines, and somewhere out there, in the shifting black, something moved with purpose, something that should not exist. He turned onto his side, shutting his eyes against the thought, against the image of Sarah's face when she realized who he really was. Betrayer, liar, coward. The scream echoed again, faint but undeniable, carrying through the timber walls like a promise, and Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Morning brought little comfort. The sun rose pale and thin, casting a fragile light that seemed too weak to chase away the night's memory. Snow had fallen in the early hours, layering the forest in white silence. Daniel Cross stood on the porch of the ranger cabin, steaming coffee in hand, staring at the tree line as though the woods might reveal their secrets if he looked long. Enough. But the only thing revealed was his reflection in the window. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw, and a weariness that had nothing to do with sleep. Behind him, Elena scribbled into the logbook. Her handwriting was precise, almost delicate. She had insisted on noting the claw marks, the scream, even though Daniel had warned her how quickly such reports were dismissed. If something's out there, she said, we can't ignore it. Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. His job was to keep order, to make the wilderness predictable for visitors who wanted to believe nature could be tamed. Monsters didn't fit into policy, and yet the memory of that scream lodged deep in his chest like a splinter he couldn't pull out. By mid-morning, they set out again, routine patrol. The radio crackled faintly, a background hum against the crunch of snow beneath their boots. The forest was too still, the kind of silence that made every breath feel intrusive. Half an hour in, Elena stopped suddenly. Her gaze fixed on the ground. Daniel followed it. Tracks. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, but the longer Daniel stared, the less sense they made. The impressions were elongated, toes splayed oddly wide, claws digging deep, too deep, and the stride, whatever it was, it moved upright, bipedal, yet heavy enough to sink through the crust of ice. Daniel crouched, brushing frost from the print. Doesn't match anything I've seen. Elena knelt beside him, voice hushed. It's almost human. The words sent a cold ripple down his spine. He didn't want to admit she was right. The shape was wrong for a bear, wrong for a wolf. Too big for a man, too deliberate for anything else. The tracks led deeper into the trees, toward a ravine, where the snow lay undisturbed. Daniel wanted to turn back. Protocol said they should log it, maybe flag the area for wildlife specialists, but Eleanor moved forward, flashlight beams steady in the dimness of the pines. Eleanor, he called, harsher than intended. Don't. She stopped, glancing back at him. You're scared. He didn't answer. They followed the trail anyway, every step dragging them further into the wilderness. The prints grew stranger, sometimes close together as if the creature crouched low, sometimes spread far apart as though it had leapt enormous distances. Daniel's heart pounded with each new impression. Then the smell hit them, metallic, sharp, like blood left too long in the air. They found it at the edge of the ravine. A deer carcass, torn open, ribs cracked wide like broken fingers reaching skyward. Snow around it stained black with frozen blood. But it wasn't just the violence of the kill that unsettled Daniel. It was the precision. Flesh carved away in deliberate strips, organs missing as though harvested. Elena gagged, hand over her mouth. No animal does this. Daniel stared at the body, bile rising in his throat. He wanted to say it was wolves, scavengers, anything to ground the horror in reality. But the neatness of it betrayed that lie. This wasn't hunger. This was something else. The forest shifted around them, branches creaking as though under unseen. Wait! Daniel's hand went instinctively to the flare gun on his belt. His sidearm felt inadequate, laughable against the dread pressing in. Then they heard it. A low breath, heavy and deliberate, somewhere above them on the ridge. Daniel's flashlight swept upward. For the briefest moment, he thought he saw movement, something, tall, impossibly tall, ducking between the pines. Not quite human, not quite animal. Gone too quickly to be certain. Elena whispered, "It's watching us." Daniel's mouth was dry. "We're leaving, now." They backed away, every step careful, as though sudden motion might provoke it. Daniel's instinct screamed to run, but years of training held him still, measured. Only when the tracks behind then began to blur in the falling snow did they quicken their pace, the cabin a desperate beacon in their minds. By the time they reached the clearing, both were shaking. Elena dropped onto the porch steps, face pale. "What do we do?" she asked, voice trembling. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He lit a cigarette, inhaling deep, though the smoke barely steadied his nerves. He thought of Sarah, of the nights she accused him of hiding from reality, of choosing the wilderness over her. Maybe she had been right. Maybe he had always been running from something. But tonight proved there were worse things than the truth. Finally, he spoke. "We log it. We call it in. And if they don't believe us, they won't." His voice cracked on the words. "But we'll know." Inside, the radio hissed with static, a lifeline fraying at the edges. Daniel reached for it, hesitating before pressing transmit. His reflection in the glass caught his eye again. Hollow, fractured, carrying the weight of something he didn't yet understand. As he lifted the mic, the scream returned. Distant, rising from the ravine. Only this time, it wasn't alone. Another voice answered it, and the forest seemed to close in tighter than before. The second scream hadn't faded when Daniel dropped the radio. The device clattered against the cabin floor, hissing static into the suffocating silence. Elena stood frozen, her eyes locked on the dark line of trees as though waiting for something to emerge. "Daniel," she whispered. "There's more than one." He knew. He had felt it before. Hunted, the way a deer must sense wolves circling just beyond sight. His pulse thundered in his ears. All the training, the protocols, the neat manuals stacked in the ranger office meant nothing now. They barricaded themselves inside. The cabin walls felt paper thin, the windows too wide, too fragile. Daniel shoved a dresser against the door while Eleanor loaded flares onto the table. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with a resolve he envied. For hours, nothing happened. Just the steady crackle of the radio and the restless groan of wind scraping across the roof. But the forest silence pressed harder than noise, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Near midnight, a knock echoed through the cabin. 3 sharp raps. Just like the night before. Elena jolted upright, flare gun ready, Daniel's throat constricted. The sound wasn't frantic or desperate. It was deliberate, mocking. He forced himself to the peephole. His stomach lurched. No one stood outside. Just snow falling steadily, covering their tracks, erasing proof of everything they had seen. Yet the knocking continued, from nowhere and everywhere at once. Elena gritted her teeth. "It wants us afraid." Daniel almost laughed. Afraid? He was drowning in it. Every nerve screamed for escape. Yet beneath the fear lay something sharper. Recognition. The precision of the deer carcass. The calculated way it followed, toyed, circled. This wasn't just an animal. It was intelligent. And worse, it knew them. At dawn, they made the decision. Leave the cabin. Hike out before the storm closed the road. They packed lightly, flares, radios, food. Daniel carried the only rifle, though he doubted it mattered. The forest swallowed them within minutes. Snow muffled their steps, breath clouding, the brittle air. Eleanor walked ahead, her posture rigid, eyes scanning every shadow. Daniel trailed, weighed down by more than the pack on his shoulders. Memories of Sarah intruded, their last argument, her words cutting deep. You run from everything real, Daniel. One day you'll be forced to face it. He wondered if this was that day. The trail narrowed near the ravine. Fresh tracks marred the snow, those same twisted impressions leading toward the cliffs. Daniel's chest tightened. They had been here, waiting. Keep moving, he urged, but Elena stopped, her gaze fixed on something ahead. Daniel followed her eyes and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the ravine. Tall, impossibly tall, limbs too long, posture hunched yet powerful. Its skin, or what looked like skin, was pale against the trees, stretched thin like wax. And the face, if it could be called that, was a hollow, unfinished thing. Features melted, eyes, black voids that absorbed the light. It tilted its head, studying them with a curiosity that felt worse than hatred. Elena raised her flare gun. Daniel reached to stop her, but too late. The red fire arced through the air, landing just feet from the thing. The forest erupted. Shrieks, dozens of them, answered from every direction. Shadows darted between trees. Branches snapped under enormous. Wait! The creature at the ravine didn't move. It only tilted its head further as though amused. Run! Daniel shouted. They tore through the snow, the screams chasing, echoing, multiplying. Daniel fired blindly behind him, bullets swallowed by the dark. Elena stumbled, fell, scrambled up again. The trees blurred in frantic motion, but the sound followed, always behind, always closer. At last, the ranger station came into view. Steel, lights, antennas like salvation rising from the earth. Relief surged until Daniel glanced back. Elena wasn't behind him. He skidded to a stop. Elena! No answer. Just the forest closing in. He wanted to go back, but the screams were too close. Shapes moved between the pines, circling. His body betrayed him, carrying him forward, abandoning her. By the time he burst through the station doors, he was alone. Inside, warmth hit his face, but he felt nothing. He collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, rifle falling from numb hands. The other rangers rushed forward, voices demanding explanations, questions, disbelief. Daniel said nothing. What could he tell them? That the forest held things older than the park itself. That monsters wore echoes of humanity like masks. That Eleanor was gone, taken not by death, but by something far worse. Something that waited, patient and unkillable, in the snow. Weeks later, his statement became official record. Possible animal attack. Partner missing, presumed dead. His superiors closed the file. Visitors returned in spring. Families hiked, children laughed, tourists marveled at the geysers. But Daniel knew the truth. At night, when the wind swept through the pines, he still heard the knocking, and sometimes, when he stared too long into the glass of the station window, he swore he saw it staring back, staring back. Story number 4. The desert road had stretched endlessly, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through Nevada's emptiness. Leah Hart had been driving for 9 hours, her eyelids heavy, her hands sore from gripping the wheel. She had meant to reach Reno by nightfall, but somewhere after dusk she had taken a wrong turn. The GPS flickered, lost signal, and when she finally spotted the faint neon glow in the distance, it felt less like salvation and more like a trap. The sign read, Silver, Rest Motel. Half the letters were missing, the remaining ones buzzing weakly against the dark. A single truck sat rusting in the parking lot, its tires half buried in sand. Leah pulled in anyway. Her gas tank hovered near empty, and the desert stretched on in every direction. She had no choice. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale coffee and dust. A thin man stood behind the counter, his skin pale beneath the yellow light. He didn't greet her, just stared until she spoke. I need a room, just for the night." Her voice cracked with fatigue. He slid a key across the counter. "You're the only guest. No paperwork, no questions, no smile." His voice was flat, like he'd been repeating the same line for years. Leah wanted to ask if there was anywhere to eat, but the silence pressed heavy, urging her to just take the key and leave. The hallway creaked under her boots as she walked to room 6. The carpet was threadbare, patterned with dark stains she didn't want to imagine. When she opened the door, the smell hit her first. Damp air, like the room hadn't been aired out in months. The bedspread was faded, floral and stiff with age. The lamp on the nightstand flickered when she turned it on, buzzing angrily before settling into a dim glow. Leah sighed, dropped her duffel by the bed, and sat down. This was not the kind of motel she would normally choose. She usually wrote about chic hotels, weekend escapes, polished comfort. But that life, her old life, felt distant now. She wasn't traveling for an assignment. She wasn't even sure why she was on the road. She thought of him, the fiancé she had left behind. She remembered the sharp ache of betrayal, the hollow space where trust had been. She had walked out with nothing but her car, her notebooks, and a vague plan to drive until she couldn't anymore. That's how she had ended, up here, in this forgotten place. Night fell quickly. Leah tried to write in her journal, but the words refused to come. Instead, she lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator across the room. Then came the knock, soft at first. 3 slow taps against the door. She froze, the pen still in her hand. The sound echoed in the small room. She glanced at the clock. 11:13 p.m. Another knock, louder. Leah swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "Hello!" Silence. She waited, heart thudding, then stood and tiptoed to the door. She pressed her eye to the peephole. Empty hallway. Her hand hovered on the knob, but something in her gut screamed not to open it. Instead, she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Just nerves, maybe the wind." She tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in her throat. Minutes passed. Just as she started to relax, it came again. This time, sharp, urgent, knuckles hammering against wood. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Again, silence. Her skin prickled. She grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. The screen read, "No service," mocking her. She considered calling the front desk through the dusty landline on the nightstand, but when she picked it up, the line was dead. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began. The silence afterward felt heavier, like the air itself was listening. Leah climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket around her despite the heat. She told herself it was fine, just her imagination, just exhaustion. She closed her eyes, but her mind replayed the sound of each knock over and over. At some point, she drifted into a restless sleep. In her dreams, the knocking didn't stop. It followed her down endless motel hallways, doors lining both sides, every one of them locked. And still, always, that sound. 3 sharp raps, patient, insistent. She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, the lamp still flickering weakly beside her. For a long moment she listened, waiting. The desert outside was silent. Leah lay back against the pillow, eyes wide open. Her breathing slowed, but unease coiled in her chest, refusing to let go. She told herself it was over. She would leave in the morning. This was just one strange night in a strange place. But as she closed her eyes again, she thought she heard something faint. The whisper of movement, like footsteps in the hall. and in the distance, carried through the still night air, the sound of a single door closing. Leah woke late the next morning, her body aching as if she hadn't slept at all. The air in the room felt heavy, stale, and the light that pushed through the curtains was the color of rust. For a moment, she wasn't sure if the knocking had been a dream, but the memory lingered too clearly. The sound of fists on wood, the hollow echo afterward, her own pulse in her throat. She showered quickly, letting the rusty water wash over her, then packed her bag with trembling hands. She wanted to leave. The road, no matter how long, was better than this place. When she reached the lobby, the innkeeper was already behind the counter, motionless, like he had been waiting for her. "Sleep well?" His voice was flat, though his eyes tracked her, carefully. "Not really," she admitted, setting the key down. "Someone was knocking on my door last night." The man's lips pressed into a thin line. "You were the only guest. I know what I heard." A pause. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. Instead, he slid the key back toward her, his fingers pale against the metal. "Checkout isn't until noon." Leah frowned. "I said I'm leaving." His eyes lifted, cold and sharp. Sometimes the desert plays tricks. Wind, coyotes. Best not to imagine things that aren't there. Something in his tone chilled her. It wasn't dismissive. It was warning. She forced a thin smile, nodded, and left the lobby. But the unease followed her. When she reached her car, her stomach dropped. The side tires were slashed. 4 neat surgical cuts. The empty desert stretched around her, endless. No passing cars, no nearby towns. Her only option was the motel. Her throat tightened. She walked back slowly, the building looming larger with every step. The innkeeper hadn't moved. His hands rested on the counter, folded neatly. Problem? She stared at him, searching his face for any flicker of guilt. But his expression was unreadable, a mask carved from stone. "My tires," she whispered. "They're ruined." He only tilted his head. "Guess you'll be staying another night." That day dragged on like a fever. Leah paced the room, tried to write, tried to read, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, to the shadow beneath it. At times, she thought she saw movement, just the flicker of something passing by. In the afternoon, she decided to explore, hoping to clear her mind. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with rooms identical to hers. Most doors were shut tight, locked with tarnished brass bolts. She pressed her ear to one. Nothing. But outside room 3, she froze. A sound seeped through the wood. Muffled breathing, low and steady. Someone was inside. Her heart kicked. The innkeeper had told her she was the only guest. She stepped back, nearly tripping over the warped carpet. When she turned, he was there, standing at the far end of the hallway, watching. "You shouldn't be wandering." His voice carried unnaturally well down the hall. "I thought I was alone. Here, you are." He walked away before she could answer, disappearing into the lobby's shadows. That night, the knocking returned. It started at midnight. 3 deliberate strikes. Leah bolted upright in bed, her breath caught. She waited, straining to listen. Another knock, louder. She stepped to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. Again, nothing through the peephole, just the empty hall. Then came a whisper. Not outside, but inside the wall. Her chest seized as she pressed her ear against the cracked plaster. Yes, there it was. A faint rhythm, like someone scratching or tapping inside the structure itself. "Hello?" she whispered. The scratching stopped. A pause, heavy and endless. Then, 3 knocks from inside the wall. Leah stumbled back, hitting the nightstand. The lamp flickered, threatening to die. Her pulse roared in her ears. She grabbed her notebook, desperate to anchor herself, flipping through blank pages until she found words that weren't hers. Half a page, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "They never leave. Don't answer the door." Her stomach flipped. She hadn't written it. She knew she hadn't. She backed into the corner, clutching the book, whispering to herself that she wasn't crazy. She wasn't. The knocking spread, doors slamming somewhere down the hall, then silence, then another knock directly behind her headboard. Her phone was useless. The landline was dead. She considered running into the night, but the desert outside was colder, darker, emptier than anything inside. By dawn, she hadn't slept. The first light bled into the room, grey and weak. Leah stood at the window, watching the horizon. Somewhere in the hall, a door clicked shut, and for the first time, Leah realized with certainty she was not the only one staying in this motel. Leah hadn't closed her eyes once. By the time dawn spilled its weak light through the curtains, her body felt like a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. She kept staring at the motel hallway, half expecting to see a shadow pass beneath her door. When she finally gathered the courage to leave the room, the lobby was empty. The desk bell sat crooked, a thin layer of dust covering its brass surface. She tapped it once. The sound echoed through the empty space, unanswered. Then she saw it, a door behind the counter. Slightly ajar, she stepped closer. The air that seeped out was colder, mustier, carrying the sharp smell of mildew. She pushed the door open. The room beyond wasn't an office. It was a storage space, or at least it had been. Now it was something else. Mattresses leaned against the walls, stained dark with age. A single bulb flickered above, buzzing weakly. In the center sat a small wooden table, covered in old motel ledgers. Leah's stomach twisted as she flipped through them. Names filled the pages. Each entry carried a check-in date. But the checkout, columns were violently scratched out, over and over, until the paper tore. Her pulse quickened. Dozens of names, dozens of people who had never left. Curiosity will eat you alive. Leah spun. The innkeeper stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes burning with something unreadable. "You said I was the only guest," she whispered. "You are," he said flatly. Then, after a pause, "The others stopped being guests a long time ago." Her throat closed. "Where are they?" He stepped closer, and for the first time his voice cracked with something almost like fear. "Behind the doors. Some of them leave. Some of them don't." A noise cut through the room. 3 sharp knocks. This time, not from the hallway, but from the other side of the storage wall. Leah staggered back, her blood running cold. "Don't answer," the innkeeper said sharply, his mask breaking. His voice trembled. "She'll want you to. She always wants someone to." "She?" His jaw clenched, his hands shook. "My daughter, Emily." Before Leah could respond, the knocks grew violent, fists pounding against wood. Then came a voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Daddy, let me out." Leah's stomach lurched. The innkeeper pressed his hands to the wall, whispering, "Stay quiet, Emily." His face twisted with desperation. "Not tonight." The voice turned shrill. "She's lying, Daddy. She wants to take me away like the others." The pounding shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Leah backed toward the door, but the innkeeper blocked her path. "You don't understand," he rasped. "She killed one of them, years ago. A traveler, like you. I couldn't let them take her, so I kept her here. I had to." Leah's chest tightened. The truth settled like ice in her veins. The daughter, locked away, knocking every night. Luring. "You've been covering for her," Leah said, her voice shaking. "The missing guests, all of this." His eyes glistened. For the first time, he looked almost human. "She's all I have." The wall behind him splintered. A hand forced its way through. A pale, skeletal hand with nails clawed to the quick. Emily's voice rose, high and piercing. "I want out." The innkeeper turned, his composure breaking. "Emily, please." But Leah didn't wait. She shoved him aside and bolted for the hall. Doors rattled on either side as she ran. Some slammed, others creaked open an inch, just enough for whispers to seep through. She didn't look. She couldn't. Her only focus was the exit at the end of the hall. The lobby blurred past. She hit the front doors, sunlight burning her eyes. The desert air slammed into her lungs. She sprinted toward her car, even knowing the tires were useless. Behind her, the motel erupted in chaos. Glass shattered, wood splintered, a woman's scream cut through the air. Emily's voice, furious and wild. "Don't leave me. Don't you dare leave me!" Leah threw herself into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition out of instinct. The engine roared, but the car sagged on ruined tires. She floored the gas anyway. The car lurched forward, dragging on the rims, sparks flying against the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, she saw the motel's door burst open. Emily staggered into the sunlight, her skin sickly pale, her hair hanging in filthy ropes. She was barefoot, her nightgown torn, her eyes locked onto Leah, burning with madness. And then the innkeeper grabbed her, pulling her back. They collapsed together in the doorway, a grotesque tangle of desperation and fury. The motel seemed to swallow them both as the doors slammed shut. Leah didn't stop. She drove until the road blurred, until the motel was nothing but a memory in her mirror. Sparks trailed behind her like a funeral procession. When she finally reached the next town, her car barely crawled into the gas station lot. She stumbled out, shaking, sobbing, her notebook clutched to her chest. Later, when she opened it, she found new words written across a blank page in the same uneven hand as before. "You can leave the motel, but the knocking will follow." Her breath caught. She slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. For the rest of her life, Leah would hear it sometimes, late at night, in the silence of her apartment, on the road in lonely motels. 3 sharp raps, patient, insistent. She never answered, but she always wondered how long Emily could wait.